Hey, thank you for being here for the Naval Aviation Flag Officers panel. What you'll see is we were down to one flag officer now. I had a few folks that had pop-ups and come, but we do have good fill-ins along the way to represent all the opinions that we were going to have and the voices we're going to have along the way. So I'll start off. My name is Rear Admiral Keith Hash. I'll get a little more introduced to myself, but the first thing I was told I need to tell you is a reminder there's no videos. So make sure you're not taking video. I think they are doing some video for the event overall, but don't want the personal YouTube videos heading out there. And also, we are going to do questions, but if you were at the last panel with Admiral Grady, we're going to do the same thing with the white cards. We've got a gentleman over here with the white cards, so please, as we do our intros, go ahead and start thinking about what those questions are and bringing those questions up here to us, and we'll run through those. So, all right, so back to my introduction. Rear Admiral Keith Ash. I'm the commander of the Naval Air Warfare Center Weapons Division, and I also have a second hat as the Naval Air Systems Command Chief of Test. I am kind of one of three Echelon 3 commands in Naval Air Systems Command. As the Warfare Weapons Division, Warfare Center for Weapons Division, we do research, development, test, and evaluation for weapons and weapon system integration. So a lot of the integrating weapon systems, specifically on platforms like the F-18 and the Growler. There's also my counterparts across NavAir, Admiral Doherty, who's the Aircraft Division Commander, but also our Chief of Engineering, Chief Engineer, and then Rear Admiral Hornbuckle, who is their Fleet Readiness Center Commander, but also our Chief of Material Readiness. And when I say those chief roles, those are kind of new roles you may not have heard too much about. We as NavAir are delivering on key pillars, capability, availability, affordability, safety, and training. And those key pillars are led by and setting the standards are set by the chiefs. We work closely with our headquarters counterparts and across the whole enterprise of NavAir to make sure that we are aligning on the standards that are necessary to deliver the outcomes that the naval aviation enterprise needs. And so we work together on that. So I'll be kind of representing the three of us. Unfortunately, the other Admiral Doherty, who was supposed to be here and actually moderating, I'm filling in for him, was unable to make it today. So our next folks, and I'll introduce them real quick, and then we'll go through a little bit more of a introduction of what we're going to talk about here. Next to my left is Chris Boyle, call sign New. He serves as the Fleet Forces Training and Technology Director. He's responsible for managing the U.S. Fleet LVC, or Live Virtual Constructive Policy, requirements, and execution, as well as the oversight of the Navy Continuous Training Environment, or NCTE. He has over 30 years of experience in military, industry, and government in providing improvements into the Navy's training architecture. So a lot of experience there. Thanks for being with us, Chris. We have Captain Grand Mariner, call sign Grand, from NAUTIC. He's the Deputy Commander of Naval Air Warfare Development Center, directly involved in the training of air wings to make sure that they have the go into the high-end fight via live virtual constructive, and he'll be able to talk to you about what he does out there. And then on the end, we have Derek Greer. And Derek Greer is the Director of Integrated Battle Space Simulation and the Test Department at the Naval Air Warfare Center Aircraft Division. And within his department, he leads the development of the Joint Simulation Environment. Been a big part of that to get the F-35 through their Milestone C decision and through their initial operational test evaluation. It is now used for the high-end, that same system is now used for the high-end fight training and all across all elements of the F-35 operational and the weapons school communities. So seeing something that was developed for testing and evaluation transition into the training environment. So I'll kick off a little bit. Why are we here? Why are we talking to you as the Naval Aviation panel? You've heard some conversations today, even from Admiral Kilby and from General Watson, about the complexity of what's out there. The complexity of our systems that we're delivering to our warfighters, the complexity of the warfare of the joint force, the combined and allied forces that have to work together. We have to make sure that those systems are integrated and do function in light of the capability that we're delivering as a system of systems. The complexity of the tactics that have to be developed within those systems. And as much as we would like to bring the full live forces together to develop those tactics, we do not have enough of those today to do that, nor do we have them the complexity of the red forces necessary to truly simulate what we need to, the space we'll be entering. And so a lot of what we're talking about, bringing the live virtual constructive opportunities are important to you. And like I said, we need a robust environment to make sure that these systems work, that translates that robust environment also to training. After we've developed and made sure that we've developed the systems, we've developed the tactics, then we need to send our operators into the reps and sets necessary to deliver the capability. I like to say, we can go to the theoretical max in the test about what that system of systems can do, but then we have to lean on our training systems and our operators and our training organizations to make sure they can get that theoretical max out of our operators along the way. And we're learning how to do that in quite a few different ways. I'll just give you a quick story about myself. I'm an E-2 Hawkeye naval flight officer by trade before I jumped 2 feet into acquisition in my mid-career. But we learned a lot. I love bringing folks that were not Hawkeye guys into the back of the E-2. The old APS 145 radar actually started with green screen, phosphorus screens before we moved to digital screens. And they'd see what was on our screen, and it was pretty incredible. They'd say, how do you see anything in that? Well, it was a lot of reps and sets. In fact, we learned a lot of that. How do you track small things across the ocean, across the land, spending hours and hours staring at a screen, trying to track Cessnas across the Gulf of Mexico in counter-narcotic operations. And that was those reps and sets. And when you got that good at tracking seagulls at some point, well, you can start finding those non-squawkers in Fallon if you really want to find them. And so, but it took a lot of work and a lot of effort to do that. How do we create that same environment when we don't have the aircraft, we don't have the gas, we don't have the opportunity to send our aviators and our operators on ships and on land and under the sea into those spaces for hours and hours and hours? And we give them a complex system, which I watch my kids today play video games, and I can't do more than 2 buttons and a joystick. That's about as far as I can go. But I watch my kids do 10 buttons, a full keyboard, and 3 other things, and they're killing these video games, but they do it through repetitive training, and they do it in a virtual environment. And so our young sailors, airmen, Marines, and Coast Guardsmen, and others, they grew up in that environment. That's how they learned. And how do we create that same environment so they can employ these complex systems that their lives depend upon in the same kind of way? So that's a conversation we want to have about what we're doing in naval aviation and the demand that's coming, and then how we're delivering that. So I'll pass that on to Chris. Over to you.
Thank you, sir. So I'm no longer a trainer. I'm a training supporter, much like some people aren't athletes. They're athletic supporters. So in my role as training technology director at Fleet Forces Command, I support Admiral Cottle as the commander of U.S. Fleet Forces, who's been designated as the executive agent for LVC by the CNO. So what does that mean? That, as mentioned, that covers the policy. So how does the fleet plan to leverage LVC across its training efforts? Requirements, which is a huge important part of our job, where we engage very closely with OpNav through a process we call Fleet Training Wholeness, as well as the SysComs, to identify those requirements that the fleet trainers have to enhance training, and then we take that to OpNav and work with the SysComs to develop what those training solutions are and shepherd those up through OpNav and then to the SysComs. And then we engage post-funding, I guess you could say, with the SysComs to ensure what they deliver matches the requirement that we originally pushed through there. So what am I talking about? The integrated training facility at Fallon was one of our large fleet training wholeness efforts that we initiated. TIX2 is another one that was developed through that process, and we are currently deploying out into the fleet today. Also, some of our network sims that are out there that we have at each of the training bases that allow air wings to train together before they ever come together physically. They can actually get in these sims, and we can have folks at Oceana training to the full capabilities of the aircraft with their air wing brothers and sisters in Lemoore, as well as Whidbey Island, as well as Norfolk and Point Magoo. So we can actually pull that air wing together virtually before they ever get a chance to show up and work together as a team in their jets. And then finally, we oversee the execution of LVC. So what does that mean? So as we push these requirements up through OpNav into the SysComs to develop these solutions, they're just endpoints, right? It's just a simulator. It's just a training device. It's just a training system on a ship or an aircraft. In order to really get after composite level training as a team. We have to pull all that together and integrate those. And we do that through an environment called NCTE, or the Navy Continuous Training Environment. The Navy Continuous Training Environment is that overarching architecture. Eventually, as you look at any kind of training system or training environment, at the top, there has to be some top level that integrates all these pieces together. Some common environment where it all plugs in. Whether that's a ship at sea and its advanced training domain plugged in, whether that's a IW team trainer, whether that's a LVC solution pushing a picture into an aircraft, or a advanced sim in a sim facility. Something has to connect those all together. The Navy Continuous Training Environment is what we use to do that. The Navy, I think, had very good forethought many years ago, not many, but maybe about 10 years ago, pulling this all together, realizing that we should not just buy bespoke environments across to solve each problem, but to build one overarching environment that covers from the operator to the unit to the fleet level all the training that we would want to do. So what the NCTE has evolved into now over the past 10 years is now an environment where I can pull in an individual operator, individual ships, individual aircraft, and I can roll those all up into large-scale exercises at the fleet level and pull in mocks into that as well. So really our limitation of what kind of scenarios or what kind of exercises or training we want to do in this live virtual constructive environment is limited only by our imagination and funding to kind of pull this together, right? And that's given us great flexibility and huge return on investment on the training that we're doing, because we can pull this together. So we can go out and we can do individual training for air crew at the section, send 2 jets up to train, and they can be in a constructed environment. If we feel like it made sense to pull in an E2 in that scenario, but no E2s are up, we can pull in an E2 simulator into that environment so those folks can work together and work their weapon systems in tandem. If we need growlers, we can pull that in. If we need a ship, we can pull that in. So the possibilities are truly limitless once you leverage the network effects that you get by putting everything on the same network. I used to be more shy about this, but I think it's a fair statement to say that the Navy is far ahead of the other services in developing this environment. The other services don't have an integrating architecture like this. When you talk to the other services, they don't have something that everything plugs into, whether that's a live aircraft, whether that's a trainer, whether that's a simulator, whether that's a ship. The Navy does it because that's how the Navy fights, right? We fight as carrier strike groups. We fight as an integrated force. We can't train any other way. If we're actually going to execute, if we're going to fight like we train, we're going to have an environment where we can train and everyone's playing in that same picture. And the picture that we have to train to is driven by the threat, right? And the threat is big. It's lots of capability, lots of capacity. We can send a 4-ship of F-35s out there to fight 4v4, but it's kind of like clubbing baby seals, right? Those guys need to go out and see the hordes coming over the horizon at them and really work the problem to build up a sweat in the cockpit so they're actually utilizing the weapon system to its maximum capability. So that's why we've built the NCTE, and that's why we've invested so much into it, and that's why we're confident that that's the path forward to increase our training more in the future. So what are we doing naval aviation-wise? So the NCTE was originally built to support wargaming, think CPXs, so mock-level training. Some smart folks figured out how to pull surface ships into it, and the surface ships really got a pretty big head start on the rest of Navy in terms of integrating into a centralized network environment. We are just now starting on aviation. We started about 3 or 4 years ago. So what are we getting after now? We're getting after aviation LVC initially through a Link 16 derived solution, but that's interim only. There's a lot of limitations with it. The real answer is getting to aviation LVC through TIX2 and other means out into the aircraft and stimulate them that way. We're putting sims on board aircraft carriers, integrated together so the air wing can train virtually, even on a no-fly day. Sorry, JOs. And then we also are putting together the network sims I talked about in terms of being able to pull everybody together and train virtually as an air wing. Aviation LVC, I think, has been a game changer. If you look at the actual numbers of how much we're utilizing Aviation LVC now, the ability to inject constructive pictures into live aircraft in the air, it's exploded. I worked with this when I was active duty, tried to get it started. It really didn't come into its own, to be honest, until about 3 years ago. But last year we flew 20,000 constructive sorties across the Navy. Think about it, 20,000 sorties were just constructively generated and pushed out into the area. That's equivalent, if you think a squadron flies about 2,000 sorties, is probably a fair number to say what a squadron could fly in a year. That's 10 squadrons worth of aircraft, and not just low-cost aircraft, but these aircraft are coming at you as fast and with as much capability and as high altitude as the threat aircraft would, right? They look, smell, and maneuver like a real red threat aircraft that's out there. So it's been a game changer. If you look at the sorties flown out of Oceana, about 80% of the red air now is all constructive. Think about that. We used to, at Oceana way back in ancient days, if you wanted to go out and do an event with 14 aircraft or even 20 aircraft, you're using the whole flight line to make that happen. Now, a division will go out of Oceana and they'll fight through 14, 16 aircraft, and they do that 4 times a day. And it's no big deal because you're only launching real 4 planes. Everything else is constructively generated, aside from 1 or 2 red air aircraft that you do need, right? You need metal at the merge. You do need live training. LVC is supposed to enhance training, not replace it. So we do integrate in the live threat as well as the virtual threat or the constructive threat there. So we maximize the training potential for those getting trained. So what does that mean? That means you stopped flying red air, right? So that means now a squadron, instead of flying 50% red, 50% blue, they're flying 90% blue and 10% red. So think about that. You've now doubled your actual real training that you're doing per your gallon of gas that you're burning out there. So that's how you get twice as good, right? So we could build twice as many weapons, right? Or twice as many squadrons, or we can make them twice as good. So that's the real benefit. That's the real potential of LVC. As mentioned, we work through Fleet Training Wholeness. We work with folks like Gran at Nautic, as well as the other trainers, and not just in the aviation community, but the surface and the IW community as well, to identify what those training requirements are that they need, what are those gaps, and then we work with OpNav to pursue them. The important thing to take into account, though, and I feel myself trying to pull people back to reality a little bit, is you have to start with the training that needs to get done, right? You have to look at the FRTP and say, I've got an event called Air Wing Fallon. What is the training I need to get there? And then you need to go develop the LVC capabilities to enhance that training, not the other way around. People get really fascinated by the shiny silver box and say, look how cool and nerdy this is. But if it's a square peg for the round hole, it doesn't add value. So a lot of times we try to take a very pragmatic approach and say, how do I enhance Air Wing Fallon? How do I enhance SFARP? How do I enhance Comp 2X for aviation? That's the solution. Those are the technical things that I have to get after. I don't want to get distracted by the exquisite technical solution and miss the point of what we're really trying to do here, which is enhance training. So looking forward to further discussion with the other panelists and any questions that come up. Thanks for having us here.
Over to me, sir.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So if you guys didn't catch, Captain Andy Mariner, call sign Grand, I'm the Nautic deputy, and I'll kind of dovetail a little bit off of what Nuge said, is the fact we don't write the requirements, right? I help inform the requirements, and all the folks that work for us at Nautic are kind of they're the trainers for naval aviation for everybody that comes through, whether it's for individual training for weapons school or for air wing training to integrate with the entire CDW before they go on deployment, and we do that training 90 days before they go out the door. And I'll focus on kind of some areas that Nuge touched on as well, but I'll give you a little bit more of the on the deck in Fallon picture. So he talked about the integrated training facility, the ITF. That's where we bring the entire air wing together. But I'm also not going to hold back on the warts either. So I don't currently have an F-35 simulator in the ITF. So when I bring air wings through that have organic F-35 capability, they cannot play. They get to sit at a console in the white cell and drive digis around on their computer, which is not really good training for them, and it's not good training for the air wing. And just to put that into perspective, even the air wings that don't have organic F-35, we try to pull in an F-35 squadron too, whether it's a Marine squadron, whether it's the Air Force, or another Navy squadron that's available, so that they get that 5th gen integration. But I can't play that in the sim. And I'll tell you why that's important, because we have revamped the syllabus for Air Wing Fallon extensively over the past 3 years, and it goes through a new iteration of change every time we execute a new Air Wing Fallon. And a lot of the first 3 weeks, kind of the building block approach to Air Wing before they get into some harder scenarios, we go through, and I'm sure a lot of you have heard this, but I'll just explain how it goes, right? They do the mission planning for the execution of the mission. Then we get into the ITF and we rehearse it with everyone in there. Well, it's difficult if I don't have F-35s because they're not getting that integration piece. Once they've rehearsed, they brief it, they go out on the range and they execute. And I will tell you, it's probably a little anecdotal at this point, and there's not a lot of body of evidence and probably not enough data points to come to a good conclusion. But the way the air wing operates after they've done some rehearsal in the ITF is night and day better than when they just didn't have the ITF to go through in the first place. And so I think that is a function of, it reduces a little bit of live flight, which I got to make that pitch, same as Nuge did. There is no replacement for live. And the way we see it in Fallon is that I still need to end-to-end test all those Gucci systems that we give these JOs. And my personal opinion is they have to trust those systems. And if they've never operated them and seen that they work every time they operate them, we're never going to get the JOs to trust those systems. And that's who we're expecting to go over the horizon in the high-end fight, and they need all of their systems to work. So we see Air Wing Fallon as the opportunity during the FRP for them to come test all their systems end-to-end when they have everything they need. So we will never, ever, unless someone else tells us, get out of the live business in Fallon. We will continue to test them to the max extent possible with their live systems. And then speaking about the ITF, again, it's not just for Air Wing Fallon, right? So all of the schoolhouses, the Top Gun, the Carrier Airborne Early Warning Weapons School, they use those ITF simulators when their classes are in session. So that is their ability to run section or 2 ship, division or 4 ship phase folks through, get some training on the ground before they go spend all that blood, sweat, and treasure to put a whole bunch of airplanes airborne and get that training live on the range. And I will argue, same thing we see there. Those kids go in those trainers first. They do a lot better on the range when I'm actually spending the money for flight hours and putting up red air simulation for them. And then I'll go a little bit into the LVC, right? The way we're looking at link inject alive, synthetic inject alive in Fallon. We see it as a great, great thing. It is a way to make our range bigger. And if anybody's tracking, we've got a range expansion in progress in Fallon on the FRTC or Fallon Range Training Complex. I will argue with the systems we have coming online and some of the weapons and some of the threat systems, it's still not big enough, even with the extensions we're getting on the range. So being able to put virtual constructive entities on the FRTC and having everyone who plays see it is fantastic. And I will tell you right now, as the air wings run through, if there's no F-35, I'm going to keep picking on the F-35s. I feel bad doing it. Keep going, right? The fact that we can get the F-18s, the E-18s, and the E-2Ds all into the inject alive environment and they can fight together on the range is fantastic. But I bet you can guess who doesn't play still. Can't get the F-35s to see the same thing synthetically that the rest of the air wing can see. So if I have F-35s in Fallon, they can't play when I do the inject alive. And I've got to come up with we get some ways around it to buy back some red air, and we'll put the F-18s out in front of the F-35s, and they'll take care of a bunch of inject alive tracks, and then we'll put live bandits on the range for the F-35s when they take over the lane. But that's not a great concept. It'd be nice if I could get everybody into that inject alive environment and have them all see what the F-18s, E-18s, and the E-2D see. And then again, that's not just for Air Wing Fallon. All the weapons schools have bought off on that as well. So I'll just use one example. So Top Gun, division phase for F-18s used to require a lot of red air to be in the air to get them through that phase. I now put up 0 live bandits during F-18 division phase in Top Gun. So they're doing it all with link inject alive, and all their bad guys are synthetic tracks that get pushed over the Link 16 network, which is pretty phenomenal. They get a lot of practice when they go integrated phase with the F-35 students. And then I put up a lot of red air on the range for them to see. And again, test the systems to make sure that those JOs going through the courses are confident in the systems they have, which will never go away. And then kind of the last thing I'll talk about from the perspective of Fallon is, I think we covered it a little bit, but like open air battle shaping is kind of the wave of the future we see. And if you're not familiar, I'm going to say this in layman's terms, so if I say something wrong that anybody hears up here, feel free to correct me, but it kind of brings, to me, it's like it's the nexus of live virtual constructive. They're all there. The data is getting passed back to the ground stations. I can get high fidelity data when I land. I can see the shot sheets. I can see shot adjudication. It takes a lot of the pain away from the debrief, the flying, and I can get a lot of the goodness out of the execution that right now takes a good 3 to 4 hours post-landing to get to a good debrief. It also allows me to inject a lot of those virtual and constructive entities into the picture so that I could throw one of the students in a simulator if, say, their airplane goes down as they walk. They can just run over to the ITF, jump in a simulator. I can zap them out to the Marshall Point, and the rest of the fighters can meet them, and they're going to see everything else that's going on in the range if they're all linked into open air battle shaping. Did I say anything wrong with that? Is that pretty close? Close enough? Okay. So not that that's a panacea, but for us it's a kind of that 90% solution to train fully live, virtual, and constructive. And it's kind of the push we're going to as we incorporate TCTS2 and Fallon that we're doing right now and looking to run air wings across that system. Again, that's kind of our perspective from Fallon, and we are fully on board from my boss's perspective in the live virtual constructive. We'll keep the L big. We do like the live flying because there's nothing that can ever fully replace that, but we are all in on VC to make sure that we're getting that training to weapons, systems, and threats that we just can't replicate with anything else. And look forward to the conversation and any questions.
Derek, over to you.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. Derek Greer, NOC AD. Wanted to share a couple activities related to training that we are working on at NOC AD. Number one, the Joint Simulation Environment, JSE. So very quick background on JSE, high fidelity modeling and sim environment built to get F-35 through OT, as Admiral Hash kicked off with. We finished F-35 OT back in September of 23, so a little over a year ago. In the process of getting that simulator ready and in a good enough state to support OT, the F-35 community realized that we built the best F-35 training environment in the world. So once we finished OT, we started supporting high-end fight training just about real time at Pax River, just about full time, excuse me, at Pax River. So to give you a couple stats, in FY24, we supported 40 weeks of training, so FY24 that just ended, 40 weeks of training, 820 F-35 pilots from all around the world, the Navy, the Air Force, the Marine Corps, a few Aussies and UK, went on TDY to Pax River to get the high-end fight training in JSE because they can't get that anywhere else, 820 of them. That equated to over 10,000 F-35 sorties, over 30,000 AMRAAM engagements. So this is one fiscal year, one site. That's the impact that we're having on the operational. These are operational squadrons and weapons schools, by the way. And they are coming to Pax River, again, because they can't get this anywhere else, but they're coming because they want to. They realize that the red air presentation, the JSE representation of the electromagnetic spectrum is better than anywhere else that they can get in any sort of environment. And they are able to practice their tactic, and they will be punished if they make a tactical mistake. They don't get that very many places. Punished often is in the form of death in the sim. They make a tactical mistake as an H-ship, they are probably going to die against a near peer, say a H-ship of F-35s versus 16, 20 red air. They make a mistake, they're going to die. That's going to lead to their 4-ship dying. That's going to lead to the 8-ship probably dying. That realism they can't get anywhere else. So quite a big impact we're having on the operational community. Again, built to support OT. We are now using it for training. Break. We are also expanding that, so Pax River is not the bottleneck. So in about 1 year's time, the end of 25, we will have JSE sites, 2 at Nellis, 1 at Edwards, and Fallon. The ITF that both Nuge and Grand talked about will be migrated to that full JSE architecture. So in about a year, the bottleneck that we, present day NOC AD, are for getting operational squadrons through will be no more, and they'll be able to go to Fallon, they'll be able to go to Nellis or PAX and get more and more operational pilots through. Essentially overnight, all 3 service weapon schools have changed their curriculum to bring their students to JSE. So they are bringing the students with the instructor pilots for a week of air-to-air and a week of air-to-surface as part of the curriculum. And again, they're coming to PAX today, but once Fallon's online, once Nellis is online, they will be doing that at those sites. We are working with our Air Force partners, and we have a sustainment plan that is not going to build the individual program offices for new threat integration, new parts of the electromagnetic spectrum. That is a shared bill by the Navy and the Air Force. So the F-35 JPO funded the entire JSE facility to get operational at Pex River today. But in the future, they will only need to fund their piece of it. There's a central sustainment pot that will be funding the program agnostic components of JSE, and that will be put into one suite of software, and that software will be going to all of the sites. So we are lockstep with our Air Force partners, and there will be one JSE suite of software running at all sites. Just like your iPhone runs, everyone's iPhone runs iOS, all the JSE sites will be running the same software. So what that means, a certain threat performance at PAX is going to be the exact threat performance at Fallon. It's going to be the exact threat performance at Nellis. Okay, so that's a quick little dump on JSE. The next thing, if you heard Vice Admiral Cheever and SecNav this morning mention SIMS at Sea. We, NOC AD at Pex River, built that. That is integrated, meaning networked, Super Hornet, Growler, E-2D, and F-35 installed on the Abe Lincoln today at a fully informed level. That integration on a carrier at the appropriate classification level had never been done before. And we worked, I see Captain McGee over there, we worked with N98, with PMA 205, and in a matter of about 6 months from the time that we got the go, 6 months later, we had those simulators networked and installed on the Abe Lincoln in San Diego about 3 or 4 days before it departed San Diego back in June. So huge step forward for integrated training while underway, and now we are working with the community to scale that and get that on the GW and the Carl Vinson next. The next thing we are working on is F-35 government-owned. We call it Phoenix. So there is a government-owned, non-OFP version of an F-35 simulator called Phoenix. You heard Grand speak very loudly about the lack of F-35 at ITF.
I know
we are addressing that. So, Grant, I don't know if you've seen the schedule lately, but you will have an 8-ship of cockpits in Fallon next month for integration, and late February, early March, we will IOC the ITF in 8-ship to join the 24 Super Hornet Growler tubs, E-2D, and Aegis at ITF in the next couple months. That is, we are super close. We're working with our industry partners, and again, N98, PMA 205, to get that 8-ship to Fallon as soon as possible. So that's kind of the near-term gap filler for F-35 at Fallon. In parallel, we are also working to get the high fidelity, the OFP version of F-35 that we have at Pax River to Fallon as well. That is about a year out. We are targeting the end of 25 to have the full OFP version of F-35 integrated at Fallon, running the full JSE software baseline in about a year. Last thing I'll mention, Grand briefly mentioned OABS, and we are working with Nautic and especially Admiral Hash's team at NOC WD on open air battle shaping in the sense of a single repository of models. So it would be really criminal on our part, the Warfare Center, to have an AIM-120D model that acted differently in Fallon than it did at Pax River, than it does in OABS. We are working very closely with NOC-WD such that it is a single suite of models running at Pax River, Fallon, Nellis, in the air, on the range, and OABS. What that means is if we do our job right, AIM-120D performance or a threat performance or even F-35 performance, it should be as close to identical as possible, whether you're flying in a sim at Pax River, whether you're at ITF at Fallon, whether you're at a NCT LVC event on the East Coast, or whether you're doing open air flight at the FRTC. So those are some things that we are working on broadly at NOC-AD, really all kind of underpinned with bringing the high-end fidelity fight to our warfighters so that they are as prepared as possible for the near-peer fight.
Yeah,
Admiral
thanks,
Hatch.
Derek. You kind of already answered it, but I'm going to kind of roll out this first question to talk a little bit more about it. But it talks about, given the LVC is the future, how do we optimize LVC in a limited budget environment? And this part I want to kind of emphasize, you already started doing that, Derek, is the reality is we've had a lot of investments in live virtual constructive in a research and development, test and evaluation environment. Tons of money went into the joint simulation environment to get to IOT&E. It was not intended to be a trainer, but we found out it's an amazing trainer. Open air battle shaping, we talked about, that was developed really off a system for F-22 initially and then F-35 for the live virtual constructive part of their initial operational test and evaluation, has now become a scaled version that we do an event called Gray Flag, which is a maritime flag series. If you heard of the orange flag and green flag and red flag the Air Force has done for a while, we now have a maritime version of that, which is actually greater and larger than most of those other Air Force flag versions, and it's joint and combined where we bring in the system, and we use a pod from RDT&E called CRISP pods, but we're also integrating the TIX2 pods so that it is one system. And so as we align these different efforts, we start to use our dollars in a more combined way. When Integrated Test Training Facility was first developed, there was one team that did all that development and put it together. JSE was like a building and a half over doing something completely independent. As we work together now you just heard Derek talk about that JSE, with the fidelity it brings, they're bringing solutions now that they need, but are also going to bring the high fidelity that they really need into the ITF. And so as we iterate and grow, it's one we do together. And it's not just the Navy. Derek mentioned several times the Air Force. We're working very diligently with the Air Force to make sure that the standards are aligned on JSE and open air battle shaping, and that the standards are aligned across those different environments to more of a common simulation environment, so that when we put out RFPs to industry, you know that this is how you integrate in. And when you integrate into one of those environments, you integrate into all those environments. And so that's part of how we were trying to reduce the cost, because we can continue to do it in stovepipes, and people are doing that because they didn't have that. That gets back to my role as chief of test, but also the other chiefs, especially Admiral Doherty as chief engineer and me as chief of test, setting those standards that are where we're going for naval aviation and allowing us to work together and combine efforts where we're spending the dollars. Some of those are OSD dollars. Most of what's funded for open air battle shaping comes out of the Test Resource Management Center out of OSD. Those are not U.S. Navy dollars being spent yet. And so we're leveraging those dollars or leveraging other service dollars and combining them together to provide what our warfighters need. So I think that's another piece. Derek, do you have any more to add to that?
Yeah, I would just add, Admiral, on the threat environment side, the
Yep.
the Air Force did a study, and they are sustaining, don't quote me on the number, I think it was 37, it's some ridiculously big number, 37 different threat environments. That means when a new threat comes out, when our intelligence matures to the point we can build a model of a new threat, we're paying for it dozens of times, and that's just in the Air Force. I don't have the number for the Navy, but it's probably similar. So one of the things that we're trying to do in JSE is, we're not going to solve all M&S problems, but certainly let's integrate the threat one time in JSE. We will give it to our industry partners. Hopefully it will fit many of their needs, and we won't have to pay every type model series vendor, every weapon vendor to integrate when a new threat comes out. So hopefully we'll see some cost savings over time there, but the software JSE is not just a facility. There's a software, the operating system that I talked about, that is software. If you have a CRADA or any sort of contract with the DoD that's relevant, we will give you the JSE software for free. And it's yours. Really, our goal is to get it in your hands for acquisition reasons, to expose whatever widget you're building for the DoD to a complex threat environment earlier and faster. And again, that we are doing that one time centrally from the JSE core funding and giving it to all.
Thanks.
Sir, I'd flip that question on its head a little bit. I don't think you can train economically without using LVC technologies, unless we're prepared to build an entire near-peer OPFOR with the numbers and the capability. Think supersonic, stealth, long range, and like 70 of them coming at you. There's no other way to train economically without breaking the force. You have to leverage LVC technologies, both virtually and then through live injects to the live training.
Yeah, good input. Absolutely. I mean, the reality is we're getting more of what we need for the same dollars that we already had. Absolutely. So to that point, this is Grant. I'm going to start with you real quick. You talked a bit about this, but I'm going to take the aircrew perspective. So the aircrew that are coming to Fallon and maybe coming to Top Gun, the question is, aircrew have historically questioned simulator training, and what progress are you making in their helping them understand and reassure the value of that virtual constructive, knowing that you've absolutely said you're still going to keep flying live, but what are you saying, just the hearts and minds of our aircrew coming through, and how are they embracing that?
So I mean, that's a great question, and I remember that from being in JO and saying everybody wants to go to simulated, and we're all like, I don't want to do that. But I think what you're seeing now is that it is there's so much of it out there in the fleet. They're seeing this through their aircrew training continuum, level 2, level 3, level 4. I think there's just a lot of skippers, XOs, CAGs, DCAGs who are fully bought into this, that they see it as a good training aid and they're able to get a lot more realistic threat out of it, that I don't think it's a very hard sell for them anymore. And I'll probably botch this number, but I think the required sorties for OPFOR per year is like 47,000. And if we're able to replicate 20,000 of those with virtual constructive entities, I think they're seeing a much more robust threat. They're getting better training out of it. And I will say that now that you're seeing it all the way through the continuum, you're seeing it at Top Gun, you're seeing it at Air Wing Fallon, that they are all very much on board with it. And it's not at a reduction of flying, right? They're still flying their hours. I don't think the FHP accounts have changed. There's still the same requirement for TNR and for Sharp, that they're seeing the same amount of flight hours. They're just getting that red perspective injected when they're actually out there flying live.
Yeah, it's additive, right? Like there hasn't been a big reduction in FHP. We've managed to keep it flat because it's understanding, obviously, the budget realities that there are funding gaps, right? But there's a training gap as well, right? Hey, we have to raise our game in order to be able to prepare to fight a peer competitor who's out there, right? Like the standards are higher. And we have to close that gap with the same amount of money. And I think that's what LVC is allowing us to do. I would add to it, I'm always conscious not to smell our own snake oil a little bit and be too impressed with what we're doing. But anecdotally anyway, talking to, the JOs, talking to the commanders, the proof's in the pudding. People utilize these tools. They know they've gotten much better by utilizing these tools, and they become believers. This is the only way to do it.
And I will say the one thing I've seen a little bit of complaint, and it's not complaint, just a different perspective, is that it does reduce a little bit of our simulator usage has reduced the number of total flights in Air Wing Fallon. Because just based on the way we do the mission planning, the rehearsal, and we do a week of mission commander course where they're in the simulator pretty much 3 out of the 5 days. So there's a little bit of question from some of the CAGs and DCAGs of, hey, why are we reduced number of flight hours? And some of the mission commanders are getting a lot less flights during Fallon. But I would also argue that based on the threat and the systems we're trying to get and what we're trying to make a mission commander into, where he or she doesn't just understand the air wing, they truly understand the integrated joint fight from seabed to space of like, here's all the things that you can bring to this fight. It's going to reduce the total number of flights because they're going to put a lot more of their time just to get through one event at Air Wing Fallon. So we're usually able to talk folks through, but we just haven't had enough roll through with Air Wing Fallon that they've all seen that and gotten used to the way the new Air Wing Fallon syllabus works.
So when I was a JO forever ago, we used to go to Key West and do BFM, and now apparently they go to Pax River and do simulators. It's a brave new
Seems like
world.
a good change for trade.
Hey, so you brought up the joint force, and another question here talks about our allies and partners. And there's a little bit of an acquisition question, but I'll throw it out to you. How are we already today trying to integrate, or are we integrating our allies and partners into our LVC environments?
Yeah, I can start with that, Admiral.
go ahead,
So
Derek.
right this very moment at JSC at Pax River, we are hosting the UK and Australia for a week of high-end fight F-35 training. And that's not the first time. We've had in the last year, so out of that 820 number pilots that I gave earlier, 3 or 4 squadrons worth, so I don't know, 80 or so, were Australian or UK. So we have had at least 3 full Australian squadrons. The joint, let me make sure I get these countries right, Netherlands and Norway. Yeah, Netherlands and Norway Weapons School, so their version of Top Gun, was hosted at Pax River at JSC in October. They brought with them Finland, Denmark, and Belgium, all in the same week, all in the same facility, all fighting together. So while we are definitely giving preference to U.S. squadrons for obvious reasons, we are making roughly 5 to 10% of the available time to Australia, UK, and our NATO allies. So that's something we are doing right this moment at Pax River. And then we're setting the stage for, from a security CONOP perspective, that same exact methodology that we use to allow that to happen at PAX will be applied to Nellis, Fallon, Edwards, et cetera.
Very good.
Sir, in the fleet, we just did the first fleet synthetic training event, joint training event with the UK. They brought over 100 folks to participate in Truman's FIST J here earlier this summer. We have follow-on discussions in London just last month talking about how we're going to integrate Spartan and Gladiator, which is their naval and their Air Force LVC networks, more tightly into NCTE. We are working with them, giving them some of our brain power, right, and lessons learned, and helping them make the right investments to get them to the level that we both feel that they need to get to in terms of integrated training with us. We're talking to the French here next week and seeing what further advancements we can make with them as well. We're going to bring them down to Hefty Hall, which is the Global LVC Operations Center, which hosts not only our exercise control, but also our servers, our network ops center, as well as our cross-domain solutions, and kind of showing them that in terms of what the capability and what the potential is for LVC. So.
That's good. It's great to hear what we're already doing. Go
Can I
ahead.
make one
Yeah,
comment too? Because it's a great pitch for Fallon right now with all the people listening in the audience. So we've talked about the JITC in Vegas, and we have an idea, and it's kind of in its infancy right now, but we'd like to get to the point where we have the ability to simulate, again, like I said, seabed to space. And if you're familiar with MISR, Maritime Intelligence, Surveillance, and Reconnaissance, we go through some of their high-end fight in Resolute Hunter, where we bring allies, partners, joint out to Fallon, and there's 380 plus participants from all over the place. And it's very hard because I got to use the live systems because I don't have any way to simulate that. So I would think that's one where we're working very close with allies and partners and across the joint force. And then I will also say that with the ITF, we've had a lot of interest from the UK and the Australians about how do I set up something similar in their country so that they can do very similar things to what we do. The Australians a little more so than the UK because they fly a lot of the same things we do. But we've had good conversations with those folks to understand, and then, I mean, in the end, it would be nice to be able to link together, but that's probably a ways down the road, but we'll get there. So just a little perspective from Fallon.
No, that's good to hear. And I'll just say from an acquisition perspective, we were trying to take strides in that direction. I'd go back to our recent Gray Flag 24, where we had partners from Canada, UK, and from Australia flying in the environment. And when you fly in Gray Flag, you fly and you have open access to the entire environment. So it's a full security construct that we're working through with folks in OpNav and up in OSD to make sure that we can share information. Because to integrate systems, you have to understand how those systems work together, and it's really important. We actually helped our Canadian friends make some really good discoveries in their integration efforts along the way. We had E7 and participate for the very first time. I think we have road to go. We're not there yet, especially if you want to say fully integrating our allies and partners into our LVC environments, but I think we're taking strides, and some of those have to be policy strides. And we're getting moving in the right direction to do that. So I'm pretty excited about that. There will be some technical strides that will come along the way, but we're moving much further than I've ever seen in my career, trying to integrate our partners into our most exquisite capabilities so that they can be fully shared ally partners in that. So here's a couple questions. I'll kind of link these together a little bit. There's a question about the plan for integrating JSC sites together, and then also JSC NCT. And there's another question about the compatibility of JSC in an NTC. Are they different? Or are we trying to merge them together? So Chris, I'll start with you, your perspective on that, and we'll get to Derek on some of the technical aspects of that.
So I think first of all is to understand just because they have E at the end of them doesn't necessarily mean they're exactly the same thing, right? And you can put them in the same bucket. I think JSC, as mentioned, is an exquisite simulation environment, which I wish we could have at all our simulator sites, right? And it's fantastic for putting dudes in a cockpit or gals in a cockpit and letting them go fight in a accurate EMW environment as possible, especially for those 5th-gen aircraft that the EMW environment is so important. I'll go back to my previous comments. NCTE is more of the integrating architecture across, right? That architecture is what's pulling ships in. At the end of the day, everything has to plug in and integrate together. Whether we can connect JSE to a ship or vice versa, to be honest, I think that's for the engineers to figure out. There's probably a lot of work to be done, and I'm not going to do engineering up here. So, but in terms of, I think they coexist for different purposes. And once again, JSE is going to be a huge step forward for training at the ITF. And that's going to be awesome. We're going to figure out, as Gran mentioned, talked about OABS, and hey, I wish we could get to a point where jet goes down the line, kid runs over, jumps into a sim there in the ITF, and can participate in the event. Realize I didn't talk about it too much, but NCTE, in addition to our network environment and our training environment, is also the environment that's on all our ranges, right? In order to enable LVC, NCTE is the ranges, right? So the TIC systems are plugged into NCTE. Our radios are plugged into NCT. That's what allows us to blend live and virtual together. So if we ever get to the point where we've got the JO jumping into the sim and participating out in Fallon's range is NCTE, so we'll have to make that JSE connection somehow and figure out how to make that happen. So if you ask me, that's probably the first use case or the first driving requirement that's going to make us figure out, okay, we've got this, how do we plug that into an NCTE architecture and plug it into synthetic inject alive or what have you.
Go ahead, Derek.
Yeah, so I mentioned that in about 1 year, we will have JSE sites at Fallon, 2 at Nellis, 1 at Edwards. They will not be connected at that time for real-time ops. There are physics problems with that, and just the architecture of JSE, we are generating the electromagnetic spectrum and just gobs and gobs and gobs of data that we cannot distribute over our networks in real time today. With that said, all is not lost. We do think that there's some technology challenges that we can overcome and get them connected in the future. But I want to go back to an example that Nuge gave a little bit ago. You know, he gave the example of, hey, there might not be an E2D up in the air today, so we're going to create a Digi. That is the exact the mentality that those JSE sites will have. If you can't connect Nellis to Fallon for an E2D for some reason, we can just spawn a Digi E2D, and it'll have to be good enough for that particular case. And we've built up the modeling fidelity of our Digis, or our constructive entities, significantly over the past couple years. So when we drop a Digi E2D in our environment, it's a really good E2D. Is it as good as a one in flight? Of course not. But can it augment and supplement an F-35 fight, or a Raptor fight, or a Super Hornet fight? Absolutely. It has no idea that the Link 16 messages are coming from a Digi instead of an airborne entity. So we've really beefed up that local Digi fidelity such that the distributed ops, in some cases, we've got past that.
Yeah, thanks. And I'll just add a little more. I think, Nuge, you kind of brought up a little bit of that there is a different perspective of why you use one versus the other. And you kind of mentioned that, Derek. What you have built in JSE is physics-based, and physics is still limited by the speed of light. And so, at some point, when you get things too far away, even if it's on a wire or a fiber optic cable, they're still that far away, and the speed of light's still the speed of light. And so there is some limitations. But at the same time, there's opportunities to use the infrastructure of one and the fidelity of the other as appropriate. And I think that's where our integration efforts are happening, and where Fallon is a great lab for that. Open air battle shaping, integrating up there this summer. Bringing some of that live vertical constructive, also understanding how NCT works. NCT work is great when you have someone in Whidbey has to work with somebody in Norfolk or in Oceana. You're not going to get high fidelity environments, but you're going to get a representative environment, an effects-based environment that allows the training to happen. And there's an architecture that allows that training to occur on a much more frequent basis than you had to fly or growlers cross country to be in the same site, or you got to all meet in Fallon to be in that high fidelity. So it's different scales along the way, and we're going to continue to learn as much as we can integrate these systems together. And that is the key, is when you're compatible with one, you're compatible with all, and that's going to take time and effort and continued collaboration along the way. So great. Let's see, this is the next one. How are we doing? We've still got a few more minutes. We've got a few more questions to go. This gets to the next one. What recommendations do you have for standardizing data and creating interoperability models from LVC training for use? And this is war games at the operational level, but let's kind of let's stick on those topics of standardization and interoperable models. So Derek, I'll let you start there, and then we'll roll up to more of the operational level eventually.
Yeah, I would start with standardized interfaces between the models themselves and the environment that they are connecting to. That is one thing that NCTE has done really well. We had some additional fidelity requirements in JSE, so we had to, I won't say develop our own interface, but had to beef up the interface to account for the electromagnetic spectrum. But that is probably the one very common question that we get. Hey, I've got I'll use E2D again. I've got an E2D model. Can I just plug it into JSE? Well, that's a complicated question. It depends. But we do now have a government simulation interface that we are providing to our industry partners. In some cases is on contract for our acquisition contracts. And when our industry partners deliver a model that it adheres to that standard, it will plug right in. So we're having to play catch up a little bit. Certainly moving forward, the newer weapons, the newer platforms, we'll be able to knock that out right from the get-go, but we're playing catch-up with our legacy platforms. But yeah, I would start with interfaces. And if there is an existing model that we can use and not have to rebuild it, then of course we want to do that.
Outstanding. Did you have any additional?
I would just say probably from NCTE, if you could kind of break it out, it's the network, it's the software, it's the workforce, and most importantly of all of that is probably the standards of what NCTE is, right? So it's the standards, the NCTE interoperability standards. It's published and put out of like, hey, this is how you connect in and through the NCTE. That is the strength of it. In fact, we're working with the joint staff as well to see how we might apply those standards to working with the joint force as well.
Good. And you brought up E2D as the model. That's one of your next platforms you've integrated into JSC. And my understanding is that we had an industry partner that was leaning forward and wanted to collaborate. And so can you talk about how that happened? I mean, we're not expecting all industry just to show up with their own cash, but if they want to, how did we work with them?
Yes, absolutely. So in that case, this was an industry partner that came into a CRADA with us, NOC-AD, a Cooperative Research and Development Agreement. And we gave them the JSC software. And at their own expense, they learned it. They put their software developers on it. They got up to speed on how to interface something to JSC. Then, fast forward 12 or 18 months, E2D integration into JSC was a funded effort, and they were the best positioned industry partner to do it. They happened to have a model, they got the work. And there was numerous reasons why that happened, but principally because they had 12, 18 months of JSC experience dealing with the environment. It is complicated, by the way. I do not want to, we don't just click a button and it just works. It is complicated stuff. But they leaned in exactly as you mentioned, Admiral Hash, and they got up to speed, and now they're doing great things.
Yeah, that's great. And so, as we set these standards, you don't have to go out and learn 10 different things. You can learn a smaller handful of things. And we have opportunities now at the warfare centers, both AD and WD, to set up those created environments where you can collaborate. That's another way to reduce, the flat line of budget isn't flat if all of industry is now using their IRAD in areas that can support what our warfighters need. And so definitely want to partner with companies, with industry, talk to us about that and opportunities for you to learn and for us to learn from you. Because the other reality is the standards are great, but I guarantee that if you just rely on the government to develop the standards, we'll get it wrong somewhere. So how do we collaborate with you on what the right standard needs to be as we continue to bring new and better models? And so that collaboration is really important to make sure that we're bringing the very best to our warfighters. So,
and if I could give one other example, we're working with another industry partner that has leaned forward to help us get the standard right. To your exact point, Admiral Hash, we came out with version 1.0 of our government SIM interface, and we definitely did not get it right. But we're working with an industry partner and looking forward at future sensors and apertures, looking back at what exists now. What message did we miss? What complete parts of the spectrum did we miss? And really just trying to future-proof as much as we can with what we know today, that interface to the max extent possible.
Great. All right, let's get to the next one here. Got a few more minutes here. So we've already talked about the joint training and wargaming. Maybe we can do a little more. Is there any experience or thoughts that working on, we get beyond, we talked about air wing training, we talked a little about even about at the Comp2X kind of level. Once we get beyond that, how are we integrating? Maybe the correct question, you've heard this a couple times. What are you thinking about integrating the MOC? If we're going to start fighting from the MOC, as the CNO says, what does that look like, and what do we see that going in the LVC world?
So those efforts are already ongoing. We integrate the MOC for both East Coast and West Coast Comp2Xs as part of Comp2X. The CST4 and CST15 have little separate syllabi just based on geography, and C2, one obviously in the Atlantic, one in the Pacific. But we are, for a portion at least of Comp2X, the MOC is integrated into that. The Navy overall does a MOC level exercise, a worldwide exercise called large scale exercise every 2 years. And that generally integrates across all the MOCs in the world, as well as some of the Marine Force headquarters as well, to basically fight the Navy on a global scale using NCTE and the LVC environment. As mentioned, Because our environment was built from the ground up to connect everything into it, we can compose that exercise and do tactical vignettes driven by the larger scale mock-to-mock fight that's going on, right? So you can have a very high operational fight, strategic level fight, that the mocks participate at the operational level, and then you can have actual individual CSG staffs and CSG ships participate at a tactical level, and now we can even pull in aircraft into that as well. To basically, hey, I want to run this vignette and go after that. One of the issues, to kind of twist that a little bit, joint, and this is kind of the struggle and the friction we're getting, because we're so well integrated in the Navy, because we can do this, we struggle pulling other services into the same level that we are right now, right? We have Inject Alive, the Air Force doesn't have that. We have all our ships tied into this, the Air Force doesn't. So we have to pull them in maybe as a virtual participant into it. We are making strides, though. The Marine Corps has decided through their Project Tripoli to adopt the NCTE architecture, and they're leveraging that as they build out their own LVC environment. In fact, the Marine Corps network is hosted on the same servers that the Navy NCTE is as well. And the Air Force is moving forward on their live mission operations network, which is also NCTE based, which would allow us to connect live ranges seamlessly between Air Force and Navy ranges and connect in our virtual participants as well. If you can kind of imagine the architecture here, our Navy ranges that are on NCTE can be peered and connected seamlessly to the Air Force ranges that are on LMON currently. NCTE virtually, we can plug in to those as well. So if the Air Force wanted to do, and our NCT is plugged into the Air Force DMON, so if the Air Force wanted to do virtual and live together, they could connect through NCTE to their own ranges to make that happen. So we're slowly kind of blending this together. I think overall, if you look at the direction that all this is going, a lot of the tools, a lot of the environments, a lot of the models, everything is a merging lane coming together. What you see is a lot of the same tools that we use on the Navy ranges, the Air Force is adopting on theirs. We're trading back and forth in terms of things that the Air Force is developing for their ranges, and we're trying to take advantage of that as a cost savings or economy of effort. So I think it's going to be more and more kind of blended together. But we are absolutely trying to bring the other services in as much as we can, because it's a joint fight. And if we train to fight Navy only, that's probably not an accurate nor effective way to train. We have to pull in the joint force as part of that.
Yeah, thanks. All right, I'm going to go with one last question here, and then we'll give a little wrap-up time for everybody. So it's how does LVC accelerate the acquisition process? And I'm going to start off with that one a little bit. We've been using modeling and simulation in certain programs to try to do just that. I mean, some of our weapons programs are almost fully modeling and simulation programs. We do very few actual live shots. And as we move into the world of digital engineering, it's really important. We have modern programs that are starting off in that world of digital engineering, where RFPs are going out as models, not as a stack of papers, where the proposal from industry is coming back as a model that will be run in a modeling and simulation environment, so that we can understand that the requirements are being met and that we can have that iterative work with the multiple proposers and get to a design. We can keep multiple folks in the game in acquisition. We don't have to pick the winner before we start actually developing the design of the aircraft or the weapon, that kind of thing along the way. So we're already exploring some of those elements. We've used that, and I see future programs being both feed in on that element. That also allows us to mature the systems. One of the things as Chief of Test, my task from both across the whole Naval Aviation enterprise and the Air Boss, Admiral Chevy, as NAVAIR SysCom, has been how do we optimize the delivery of capability? We did some historical review and realized we deliver over 70% of our capabilities late. That's everywhere from a few months to a few years, but they're still late. They're not what we told the warfighters they were going to get, and those requirements are based on when they needed them. And so how do we do that? And some of that is to understand using these live virtual constructive environments, these modeling and simulation environments in the right way, using digital engineering so that we can mature the system. Because when we looked at why were those systems delivering late, it was because the system was just not maturing on the speed and timeline we expected. And we didn't know it many times until we got to that live test event way into the system. And oh, by the way, that probably started a year later than we wanted it to start anyway. So we were learning far right in the whole development cycle. So how do you move that learning left? And this is where LVC creates those opportunities in the acquisition cycle. That does mean we have to have, once again, standards for how we start our models so that the models are delivered and developed in a way. There'll be different fidelities. There will be lower fidelity models in the beginning until we add more realism. You'll have to do some live testing of components and pieces and parts to inform those models along the way and how we build that. So as we learn about digital engineering, as we learn about these more common environments that have common interfaces, it'll allow us to move faster and to mature the systems faster. And oh, by the way, as we move through that, they will then hopefully seamlessly integrate into the training systems because they were already developed. The models were already built, and we know they work, and they're already in systems in the test environment that will be either completely compatible, if not the same systems they're going to integrate into for the training environment. And so that will accelerate the delivery and the training. We always talk about, I know when I delivered E2D, we delivered the aircraft and we delivered the simulation for that software 1 to 2 years later. And so we always wanted to deliver the software and the trainer earlier. Well, the problem is you had to go test it in a live environment before you could do that. But if we're doing this in a virtual and live environment, if we're doing the models and model-based system engineering along the way, guess what? Your trainer model is being built along the way as well. And so you could almost deliver the trainers before you deliver the aircraft because you've done that along the way. And so great opportunities. We're still learning. We're still growing. We don't have a data point that says we've reduced and delivered now 50% of our things on time or 20% of our systems on time, but we're absolutely seeing opportunity here and driving into that. Derek, have you anything to add to that from an acquisition point of view?
Just a foot stomp, getting the operationally relevant threat environment in our vendors' hands earlier. You know, one of the things that delays the acquisition lifecycle is OEM develops a product, comes to a government lab or a range, and threat performance is different. They got to go back and fix something, and then we get in this loop. By getting that standardized threat environment into their hands earlier, hopefully we won't completely eliminate that loop, but hopefully we will shorten it, reduce it, and make that much, much quicker. And also just a foot stomp, Admiral Hash, your example of delivering a model as part of the response to a proposal and eventually delivering a model with the actual aircraft or weapon system. A model integrated in the JSE that we don't do as an afterthought, that we are not integrating a model after it's already deployed to the fleet. We are doing it either before or in parallel, and we're making that right now.
Awesome. All right, well, I'm going to give everyone about 30 seconds. What's something you wish we had, what's the one more thought you want to leave us with? And we'll go down the line. We'll finish this out today.
I would just leave you with, if you want JSE software, we've got a process. We want you to have it. We want you to tell us where we can make it better. Admiral Hash definitely nailed it. Like, we don't think we got it perfect. We know we didn't get it perfect. So if we, the government, can help you, industry, with delivering timely products to get in our warfighters' hands, we want to help.
Thanks. Graham?
I don't want everybody to think I was picking on F-35s. I know that's all coming. We work closely with Derek. I knew he was going to talk about it. So I think the big thing for this audience to know is that we at Nautic are fully invested in the VC portion, along with the live, keep the big L. But we want to see this as a way to take the next step to get the true training to the high-end fight, where I don't have to white card anything. I don't have to do TAC admin problems because I can't get the right replication. And we see this as the way through open air battle shaping, TCTS2, and the JSC environment, getting all those things tied together. I know it's kind of a big ask for Nuge and team because that is a lot of things that need to come together. But I think that is the long-term, long-distance goal for what we see as training for naval aviation going into the future, because it's where we have to go.
Good. Nuge?
So from our office, we drive the requirements to OpNav. But those requirements we drive come from those training organizations that have them, right? So you heard Grant, hey, this is what I need.
Is that a good requirement?
Yeah, that's good. There, you just gave me the requirement. I got to go. So if you have solutions, right, engage with those training organizations and tell them what that solution is. Get us smart on it, and we can help drive those up and say, hey, there's a solution that we want to get after to improve training at NAUTIC or SFARP or what have you. The Navy has put emphasis, and the CNO has put emphasis on how we shoot, how we defend ourselves, how we move, and how we resupply at sea. But one of the major supporting elements of that is LVC. And that's one of her highest priorities and one of the Navy's as well. It's because you cannot get a higher return on investment than a well-trained force that's out there knows how to use their weapons. If you look what has happened in the Black Sea to the Russian Black Sea Fleet, as opposed to what the Red Sea situation is and the ability of U.S. forces to fight day one in an environment they never faced before, I think LVC has a little piece of that, and that is the return on investment you get, is that tactical ability. You have veterans who have fought a war 100 times in training, fighting against people who've never seen it before, right? That's the difference, and why LVC and these capabilities are so important in how we train in the future. Thanks, sir.
Thanks. Yeah. Hey, I'll just address one more question here that came in. I'm going to address it by not addressing it. Is how are we helping this with our maintainers? And you've got a panel up here that's very focused on the operational use of the systems, not the maintenance of the systems. If you can find Admiral Hornbuckle, he's roaming around out there, so see if you can find him. But I would encourage you, anybody from NOC TSD, to have that, sit down with them. They are doing things right now that are bringing these technologies to our maintainers as well. And I just want to say thank you to our panelists. Thank you for being here today and answering these questions. Thank you to Rook and your team for hosting us and allowing us to have this conversation, and look forward to continuous conversations as we align, as we work to get this right for our warfighters, and as we work to deliver what they need, when they need it, and as Admiral Chevy says, at a cost we can afford, which is important. All right, thank you very much.